My parents beat me at my brother's party for not giving them my 630k condo. I sold their house. People think betrayal always starts with a fight, a screaming match, or a slammed door. But sometimes it begins with an invitation printed on expensive cardstock, laced with fake warmth, and delivered with perfect timing. That's how it began for me. My name is Nina Dobrev. I'm 33 years old, a successful interior designer based in Chicago, and until a few months ago, I thought I had finally escaped the grip of my controlling family. I worked for everything I had, every client, every dollar, every inch of peace. But that illusion shattered the day I showed up at my younger brother's engagement party and left with 12 stitches above my eye and a decision that would change everything. I grew up in the leafy suburbs of Oak Brook, Illinois, in a neighborhood that looked like it was built for catalogs. My parents, Ivan and Magdalena, were Bulgarian immigrants who built their American dream with spreadsheets and sacrifice. My father was an accountant who turned tax loopholes into an art form. My mother ran the household like a military operation. On the outside, they were admired. On the inside, it was suffocating. I was the firstborn, the perfection project. Everything from my grades to the way I smiled in photos was criticized and curated, but none of it was ever enough. My brother Alex, 3 years younger, was the golden boy. He could skip class, fail calculus, and still be the light of their lives. By the time I was 16, I had a part-time job designing flyers for local businesses and a growing obsession with architecture. My parents tolerated it, as long as it didn't interfere with what they called my real future in business school. But the moment I turned down their dream of Wharton to study design at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, things changed. My tuition fund suddenly vanished, and I was told if I wanted to waste my time coloring, I could do it on my own dime. So I did. I juggled 2 jobs, survived on coffee and instant noodles, and learned how to negotiate with both landlords and difficult professors. After graduation, I interned for a luxury design firm. Sleeping in a windowless room, I sublet from Craigslist by my late 20s. I had built a loyal client base and struck out on my own, launching Dobrev & Co. I specialized in minimalist interiors that preserved the soul of old buildings. My projects were featured in Chicago Home and Garden, then Architectural Digest, Still. My parents barely acknowledged my work. At family dinners, my mother would ask if I was still doing that decor thing, and my father never mentioned my name to his friends unless he needed to brag about my fluency in 3 languages. Everything shifted the year I turned 30. After years of renting cramped spaces, I finally bought my own place, a $630,000 loft in the West Loop, 2 bedrooms, original exposed brick, soaring windows, and just enough space to breathe. I paid for it with my own money. No gifts, no cosigners, no shortcuts. It was mine. The day I signed the closing documents, I cried in the parking lot, not from joy, but from exhaustion. That place represented every silent night I worked until 3 a.m. Every rejection I turned into strategy. And every time I swallowed the words, "I'm doing fine," when I wasn't. For a while, I kept my distance from my family. I sent birthday cards, answered texts, and showed up for the occasional holiday. But I never stayed long. Things had settled into an uneasy rhythm until Alex got engaged. His fiancée, Lara, was lovely, bright, kind, and blind to the family dynamic she was marrying into. The invitation to the engagement party arrived on a Tuesday, sealed in gold foil. It read like a royal decree, complete with dress code and valet instructions. I wasn't planning to attend until Alex called. He asked me to come, said he needed me there, said it wouldn't feel right without me, and because old habits die hard. I said yes. Jason, my boyfriend of 2 years, offered to come with me, but he had a last-minute project pitch in New York. You'll be fine, he said. Just smile, nod, and leave when it gets weird. I laughed. I should have listened. The party was held at my parents' house, no longer the modest colonial I grew up in, but now a meticulously remodeled mansion, complete with marble counters and an outdoor bar. As I stepped through the double doors in my tailored navy jumpsuit, I felt the air change. I wasn't a daughter returning home. I was a guest walking into enemy territory, and I had no idea just how far things would go. The driveway was packed with imported cars, valet attendants hustling between leather seats and glittering heels. As I stepped out of my own modest vehicle, a used Lexus I'd paid off 2 years ago, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Calm face, perfectly lined lips, a low bun, and gold hoop earrings, just enough polish to look confident, not flashy. I tightened my grip on the gift bag, holding a vintage watch Alex had once admired at a pop-up in Logan Square. I hadn't told him I bought it. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to show that even if our parents never understood the kind of love I gave, he still had it inside. The house gleamed with curated perfection. A chandelier I didn't remember hung above the marble foyer. The walls were now museum white, and every family photo had been updated to reflect their version of the truth in the kitchen. I spotted my mother arranging hors d'oeuvres like surgical instruments, her eyes sharp as ever, scanning every detail. My father stood nearby, drink in hand, already laughing too loudly with Lara's parents. When they saw me, their smiles shifted like masks adjusting to a role. Nina, my mother said with that clipped, performative tone she used for public civility. You look rested. I smiled. Nice to see you too. Mom, she didn't hug me. Neither did my father. Alex emerged like sunlight from behind a cluster of guests and pulled me into a warm hug. You came, he whispered into my hair. Of course I did, I said, forcing back the tightness in my chest. It's your day. He pulled back, his eyes scanning my face like he was making sure I was okay. I gave him a subtle nod. For now, I was. Lara joined us moments later, stunning in a simple champagne-colored dress. She hugged me too, more sincerely than anyone else had that evening. Alex told me so much about you, she said, and I believed her, for a while. It felt almost normal, but of course, it never lasts. It started small, a comment from my mother about how thin I looked, followed by a raised eyebrow when I mentioned I came alone. Still dating that man from the city, she asked. What was his name again? Jack Jason. I corrected. He's working this weekend. She nodded like that confirmed something. A good man prioritizes family. Your father never missed a thing. I didn't reply. I didn't remind her that Jason had offered to come, and I'd told him not to. Or that my father missed my entire college graduation because it conflicted with a golf tournament. Later, my father found me near the wine bar. Your condo's in the West Loop, right? He asked casually. Swirling scotch in a crystal glass. I nodded, already on edge. That's a hot market. Must have cost a fortune. It was a good investment, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I'm building equity. He smiled, but there was something calculating behind it. You've done well. Nina, we always knew you would, even if you were difficult at times. That word again, difficult. The label I'd been given since I was 13 for expressing independent thought. As the evening unfolded, my parents' probing turned more pointed. Where exactly was my condo located? How big was it? Was it fully paid off or financed? I started to realize this wasn't casual curiosity. It was reconnaissance. I caught snippets of conversations between them and a few of their friends about retirement, market downturns, and reallocating assets. When I approached the kitchen to grab a glass of water, I heard my mother whispering to Lara's father about streamlining our portfolio now that Nina's finally settled. Then came the moment I should have walked away, but didn't. My mother called me into the sunroom under the pretense of wanting to show me a gift she planned to give Lara, but inside was my father, holding a folder. They sat me down like a client. We've been thinking. My father started, that it's time you start giving back. The family's helped you. You didn't help me, I said, my voice already tight. You cut me off. I built everything alone. My mother waved her hand dismissively. We provided a foundation. That has value. My father opened the folder and slid over a single-page agreement. They wanted me to sign over temporary management rights to my condo just for investment purposes. They said. I laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the sound of disbelief colliding with old wounds. You want me to hand over my home, I asked. After everything, my mother didn't flinch. You're single. No children. You don't need all that space. It's time to start thinking about family. Real family. You mean you, I said. The ones who vanished when I couldn't pay for school. The ones who called my work a hobby for years. My father's voice turned hard. This isn't a negotiation. Nina, you owe us. I stood. No, I don't. The room was silent for half a beat too long. Then, suddenly, my mother's hand flew toward a bottle of white wine, chilling in a glass bucket. My eyes widened. Alex's voice rang from behind Mom. Don't. But the bottle came down before I could move. It struck the side of my head with a sickening crack. The world went white for a second. Then came the pain, sharp, hot, and humiliating. I stumbled backward, my fingers instinctively reaching for the wound as warm liquid spilled down my face. Someone screamed. Alex ran to catch me before I hit the floor. The glass bottle clattered to the ground beside me. In the distance, I could hear my mother's voice, calm as ever. She provoked me. You all saw it. And that was the moment I knew something had broken that night that would never be repaired. The ER lights were too bright, and everything smelled like disinfectant and latex gloves. I sat on a cold hospital cot, a sterile gauze pad taped to the side of my head while a nurse applied pressure. Alex sat nearby, silent, guilt pouring off him in waves. His shirt was stained with my blood. I could see him wringing his hands, staring at the floor like he was the one who'd been hit. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just stared ahead, trying to make sense of what had just happened. One moment I was being manipulated. The next I was assaulted with a wine bottle by the woman who raised me. And even after the hit, even after seeing the blood soaking my dress, my father's reaction wasn't concern. It was anger at me. He'd shouted at the guests that I was dramatic, that I had always been difficult, that I brought this on myself. Not once did he ask if I was okay. The doctor confirmed a minor concussion, and the wound required 10 stitches. I left the hospital with instructions to rest, avoid screens, and take the next few days easy. Jason met us at my apartment, his face going pale when he saw me. He didn't ask questions. He just wrapped me in a blanket and sat beside me like a silent wall. He knew me well enough to understand I didn't need comfort. I needed clarity. Over the next 2 days, I rested, slept, and read through every text and voicemail my parents sent. None of them said sorry, not one. Instead, they framed my injury as an overreaction, a misunderstanding. My mother's voicemail said, "You embarrassed us. Nina, we expect you to apologize before the wedding." My father texted, Let's be adults and resolve this quietly. The condo conversation isn't over. I blocked them both. That Friday, Alex came over. He brought a small bag of mail that had been sent to my parents' house, some old tax forms, a design magazine subscription I forgot to update, and one thick envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. The return address read Halber and Cohen, LLP, Trust Division. I furrowed my brow. You know anything about this? I asked Alex. He shook his head. No idea. I just grabbed everything that had your name on it. I opened the envelope slowly, expecting some random legal form. Instead, I found a letter addressed to me as the acting trustee of the Dobrev Family Living Trust. I read the sentence twice. Trustee, I wasn't part of any trust. My family had never mentioned anything remotely close. I pulled out the supporting documents and began scanning. According to Cook County records, the house my parents lived in, the one where the attack happened, was not legally owned by them, but by a trust set up by my grandmother before she passed away. And the most recent amendment, filed 4 years ago, named me as sole trustee effective on my 30th birthday. The date had passed over 3 years ago. I felt like someone had handed me a ticking bomb that had already gone off and no one noticed. Jason leaned over my shoulder, scanning the letter. This says you have full authority over the property, he said slowly. They're behind on some loan payments too. See here, I nodded. My eyes were already back on the signature line. It was unmistakably my grandmother's elegant script. The same woman who used to sneak me chocolates after my mother took my dinner away for talking back. The same woman who gave me a sketchbook for Christmas when I was 9 and told me never to stop drawing. The same woman who never trusted her own son with money, and apparently had the foresight to protect the one thing they'd never imagined losing. The next morning, I called the law office. After verifying my identity, they scheduled an in-person meeting. When I arrived, the attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Leslie Grant, handed me a leather binder and said calmly, "We've been expecting you." I blinked. I didn't even know this existed. Leslie smiled without judgment. "That was your grandmother's choice. She asked us not to contact you unless you reached out first," she said, and I quote, "Nina will know when it's time." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Over the next hour, Leslie walked me through the documents. My parents had been living in that house under the assumption or pretense that they were the rightful owners. But legally, I now controlled everything. Worse, they had taken out over $600,000 in equity loans against the property, most of them unauthorized by the trust. When I asked how that was possible, Leslie raised an eyebrow. Sloppy lenders. Most people don't verify trustee powers unless something goes wrong. And now, something has. When I got home that evening, I didn't speak to anyone for a while. I sat on the couch, the folder in my lap, and stared out the window as traffic passed below. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked anymore. I was just done. Done explaining myself. Done forgiving abuse disguised as discipline. Done tiptoeing around people who wouldn't lift a finger if I were drowning. And for the first time in my life, I had the power to do something they couldn't control. I took a long breath, then I picked up my phone and called a real estate attorney. The office of my new real estate attorney was quiet, lined with framed degrees and a few carefully chosen pieces of abstract art. Her name was Monica Reeves, mid-40s, precise but not cold, the kind of woman who had seen her fair share of family betrayals but no longer flinched at them. I laid out the situation, my name on the trust, the house my parents lived in, the unauthorized loans, and, most recently, the assault. She listened without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, She closed the folder and looked me in the eye. You understand that legally. You have the right to sell the property. I nodded. And you also understand that it would mean evicting your parents. I nodded again, but this time, slower, because this wasn't just about legality. It was about everything they had taken from me that the law couldn't quantify. Monica continued, You're the trustee. That means your responsibility is to act in the best interest of the trust. If the house is financially compromised, selling it is not only an option, it may be the responsible course of action. I exhaled. It was strange. I had spent most of my life feeling powerless around them. And now, suddenly, I was the only one with real authority. I left Monica's office with a plan, not revenge. Something better. Closure. The following week, I contacted a trusted colleague, Olivia Tran, a fellow designer turned part-time agent who had recently transitioned into high-end property consulting. We met at a coffee shop to discuss listing strategies. I chose her specifically because she had never worked with my family and didn't care about appearances. When I showed her photos of the house, her eyes widened. This place is worth at least $3 million on the market, even with the renovations they botched. I told her I wanted it listed discreetly but quickly. No signs, no open houses. She nodded. We'll make it clean, quiet, fast. The listing went live on Thursday morning through private broker channels. By Friday afternoon, we had 3 offers. The highest came from a corporate relocation executive, full cash, no contingencies, 30-day close. Olivia called it a dream deal. I called it fate. That night, I drafted the official notice. I didn't send it right away. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to explain. Part of me wanted them to understand how many chances they'd wasted, how many bridges they'd burned. But I knew better. People like them don't reflect. They rewrite. So I kept it short. As trustee of the Dobrev Family Living Trust, I'm informing you that the property located at 228 Glenwood Drive is being sold. You have 30 days to vacate. A formal notice will follow via certified mail. I sent it. Then I turned off my phone. The next morning, my inbox was already full. Missed calls, voicemails, emails laced with disbelief and fury. My father called it betrayal. My mother called it delusion. They threatened legal action, claimed forgery, called me unhinged. Then came the texts from extended relatives. You're tearing this family apart. This is not the Bulgarian way. Your parents are not perfect, but this is cruel. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded everything to Monica and asked her to handle communications going forward. Alex texted later that afternoon. Did you really list the house? I answered simply, yes. Silence followed. Then can we talk? We met at a diner halfway between our places. He looked tired, older. The lines around his mouth had deepened in just a few weeks. I didn't know about the trust. He said quietly, I swear, they never told me. I nodded. I believe you. He looked up, surprised. You do? Yes, I said, because if you had known, you would have told me you're not like them. Alex, not yet. He didn't argue. He just stared at his coffee. They're freaking out. They say you're trying to destroy them. I shook my head. I'm not. They're doing that to themselves. I'm just done pretending their behavior is normal. He hesitated. Is there anything I can say to change your mind? No, I said, with no anger, just finality. But I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this to protect what's left of me. He looked at me like he didn't quite understand, but he was beginning to, and that was enough. The next week moved quickly. The buyer's team sent over closing documents. Monica reviewed every line. The inspection came back clean. We scheduled a final walkthrough. I didn't tell my parents when. I just showed up with Olivia and the buyer's agent. The house looked the same from the outside, but something about it felt smaller now, hollow, like even the walls had stopped pretending. My mother wasn't there. My father was. He met us at the door, his face tight with rage, lips barely moving as he said, "You're not welcome here." I met his eyes. "I don't need to be. I own it." He tried to slam the door, but Olivia caught it with her boot. "Legally. This is a trustee-authorized inspection," she said calmly. "We'll be done in 15 minutes." We walked through every room while he followed us like a shadow. I took nothing in. I didn't want memories. I didn't want validation. I just wanted out. As we stepped back outside, my father hissed, "You'll regret this one day." I turned to him for the last time. "I already have. For 30 years. That's over now." The closing took place on a cloudy Monday morning in a glass-paneled conference room downtown, the kind of place where power changes hands with polite smiles and signature pens. Monica sat to my right, calm and focused, flipping through the final documents like she'd done this 1,000 times. Across the table, the buyer's attorney signed without comment, followed by the escrow officer who barely looked up. I was the last one. I paused for a second, fingertips resting on the paper, feeling the weight of everything behind this one act. Then I signed, just like that. The house was no longer theirs. It wasn't mine either. It belonged to someone who'd never be manipulated into calling it home. That afternoon, Monica delivered the official 30-day notice of eviction to my parents by certified mail, though I knew they'd already heard. The texts and voicemails had intensified over the weekend, ranging from pleading to profanity. At one point, my father had left a message threatening to sue me for elder abuse. Another time, my mother called and screamed into the phone that I was spiritually bankrupt and would never be truly loved. I saved the voicemails, not for revenge, but for proof. Proof that even at their most desperate, they still chose cruelty over reflection. To avoid confrontation, I asked Monica to handle all communications going forward. No in-person meetings, no phone calls. Everything would go through legal channels. And yet, somehow, they found a way in. The day after closing, they showed up unannounced at my office. I was in the middle of reviewing mood boards for a new client project when my assistant buzzed me. "There's a couple here who say they're your parents. They're very upset." I looked out through the frosted glass and saw them standing at the reception desk. My mother's arms crossed, my father pacing like a caged animal. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. I just stood up, walked calmly to the door, and opened it. "We need to talk," my father said immediately. "Not here," I replied. "You're disrupting my workplace. You're destroying your family." My mother hissed, "This is your last chance to undo it." I turned to my assistant. "Please call building security." "You wouldn't dare," my mother snapped. "You'd humiliate us like that. You hit me in front of 60 people, I said, my voice low and even. "This is just consequences." Security arrived within minutes. They didn't resist, but the looks on their faces said everything. To them, I had become the enemy, not a daughter, not even a person, just a threat to their illusion of control. The restraining order was filed that afternoon. Monica made it airtight, backed by hospital records, the police report from the party, and digital evidence of their harassment. It was granted within 24 hours. They were no longer allowed to come near my workplace, my home, or attempt direct contact when the papers were served. I heard from Alex that my father smashed a lamp and accused everyone around him of betrayal. My mother cried for hours but still never said the word sorry. With the sale finalized and the legal protections in place, I expected to feel relief, maybe even triumph, but what I felt was heavier. Not regret, just the kind of tired that comes after a long war no one else saw. I kept moving. I poured energy into my design firm, launched a mentorship program for young women in architecture, and partnered with a local shelter to sponsor a redesign of their women's recovery wing. Jason stayed by my side the whole time, grounding me without smothering me. He didn't try to fix things. He just made space for me to heal on my terms. The night after the restraining order was granted, we sat on my balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights flicker. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Maybe, but they'll never admit it. Some people would rather live with their lies than face the truth of what they lost." He was right, and maybe that was the hardest part. They had every chance to choose love, to choose accountability, and they chose power, so I chose peace. 30 days passed. 30. The buyers' moving trucks arrived like clockwork. Alex came by to pick up a few remaining boxes that my parents had left behind, mostly junk, things they didn't want or couldn't move in time. He stood in the doorway of my apartment holding a box labeled kitchen and said, "They're gone. Just gone." I nodded. "You okay?" he asked. "Better than okay?" I said, "Free?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "They still think you'll change your mind." "I won't," I said simply. "Then I guess this is really over." He said, "It wasn't a clean ending. It wasn't cinematic, but it was enough." The silence that followed was different from the kind I had known growing up. It wasn't laced with tension or used as punishment. It was the kind that allowed breath, the kind that gave space. After the house was sold and my parents were gone from my daily orbit, I expected to feel hollow. I didn't. What I felt was distance-wide, necessary, and earned. I returned to a routine that no longer had to be performed for anyone's approval. I wasn't trying to prove I was successful. I wasn't trying to be good enough. I was just trying to be whole. And that was more than I ever allowed myself to want before. The media never got wind of it. No headlines, no gossip, no dramatic family feud going viral. That was important to me. What happened between us wasn't entertainment. It was repair work, quiet, invisible, painful. Jason noticed the change first. He said I didn't flinch when my phone rang anymore, that I laughed more freely, that I let myself sleep in on Saturdays without guilt. I started noticing it too in the way I no longer scanned a room for approval or held my breath during family holidays. This year, I didn't go back to Oak Brook. I spent Thanksgiving with Jason and 2 friends at a cabin in Michigan. We cooked, played card games, and for the first time, I didn't have to rehearse small talk or brace myself for backhanded compliments. Alex and I still spoke, though not as often. He visited a few times, always alone. He told me he and Laura were considering therapy together before getting married. He didn't ask me to reconnect with our parents. Not anymore. He had seen enough. He admitted that what happened at the engagement party opened his eyes not just to them, but to himself. "They made me believe loyalty meant silence," he said once, while we walked through Millennium Park. "But watching you stand up to them, it kind of rewired something in me. That meant more than I could say." I poured my energy into growing Dobrev & Co. We took on 3 new commercial clients, including a wellness startup expanding into the Midwest. I hired 2 new junior designers and promoted my assistant to project lead. Every time we completed a project, I felt a deep satisfaction, not just in the design, but in knowing that the work came from a place of peace, no longer proving, no longer surviving, just creating, just being. Then, one afternoon, while sorting through a stack of business mail, I found an envelope I didn't recognize. It was hand-addressed, no return name, just a street number in Florida. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, my mother's handwriting. I recognized it instantly, perfectly slanted, cursive that once filled lunchbox notes and chore lists. But this letter wasn't tender. It wasn't even long. It read, "You may think what you did was justified, but you humiliated us. You abandoned your role as a daughter. We will never forget that, nor forgive it." There was no greeting, no closing, just that, a verdict. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel hurt. What I felt was confirmation. They hadn't changed, and they probably never would. I placed the letter in a drawer, next to the trust documents and the medical file from the hospital, not to dwell, just to remember. Because sometimes the things that shape us don't need to be erased. They just need to be named and put in their place. Months passed. The bruises faded. So did the noise, but not the clarity. When people asked about my family, I no longer avoided the subject. I said the truth, simply and without shame. We're estranged. It was the healthiest decision I've ever made. Some people nodded in understanding. Others looked uncomfortable. That was fine. I wasn't telling the story for sympathy. I was telling it to honor the version of myself who stayed silent for too long. The girl who bent herself into someone else's shape to keep the peace. She deserved to be heard. One Sunday, Jason and I stood in my kitchen making breakfast, and he asked me something I hadn't expected. "If you could go back," he said, "would you do it the same way?" I thought for a moment. "Flipping a pancake, I'd call the lawyer sooner." I said. He smiled. But everything else, I looked at him. Yeah, everything else. Because healing doesn't always look like hugs and apologies. Sometimes healing is distance. Sometimes it's an eviction notice. And sometimes it's just choosing to stay seated when the past comes knocking. The seasons shifted. Chicago moved from icy wind to the sharp green of early spring. I was walking through Fulton Market one morning, iced coffee in hand, when a familiar voice called my name. I turned. Lara. She looked thinner, a little more tired, but still carried herself with quiet grace. We hadn't seen each other since the engagement party, since the night everything broke in front of her eyes. She approached gently, as if not sure if I'd welcome it. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded. We walked to a quiet bench near a small park and sat down. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders before speaking. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened, for what I didn't do. I didn't say anything right away, not because I didn't forgive her, but because I knew what it cost her to say that out loud. "You didn't owe me anything," I finally said. "You were just trying to survive in their orbit, too." She looked at me, tears welling. "You stood your ground that day, and it wrecked me, not because it was wrong, but because I couldn't do it myself." I reached for her hand. "But you can now." She nodded. We postponed the wedding. Alex and I started couples therapy. But I think it's more than that. I need to unlearn what I thought love meant. I squeezed her fingers. It took me 30 years to realize that love isn't measured by sacrifice. It's measured by respect, if you're always the one bending. That's not love. That's control. She exhaled like she'd been holding something in for years. Before we parted, she hugged me tight and said, "I don't want to be them." "Then don't," I said. "That's the most powerful legacy you can break." Later that evening, I returned to the loft and stood at the window, watching the city blur beneath the amber streetlights. It struck me that all the things I used to crave validation, inclusion, even forgiveness had quietly lost their weight. They'd been replaced with something simpler: sovereignty. I didn't need my mother's approval to feel beautiful. I didn't need my father's recognition to know I was capable. The woman I was becoming didn't owe anyone a performance. She just needed room to breathe. A few weeks later, Alex texted, "They're asking about you again. Mom's health is declining. Dad says they might move to Florida permanently. He wanted to know if there was any chance you'd soften." I stared at the message for a long time, not with anger, just with a quiet clarity. I typed back, "I hope they find peace." But I'm no longer the path to it. He didn't argue, just sent back a single word: understood. I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom, and they couldn't give me that. So I gave it to myself. By summer, my firm had secured a long-term contract to redesign a network of women's transitional housing facilities across the city. Survivors of domestic violence, economic trauma, family rejection. These were women who knew what it meant to rebuild with no blueprint. I led the first walkthrough myself. The space was stark, institutional, but I saw potential in every inch: soft textures, natural light, colors that didn't scream at you, but welcomed you home. We weren't just designing rooms, we were designing dignity. At the kickoff meeting, I shared a story, not mine in detail, but just enough to let the room know I understood what it meant to fight for air in a space that should have protected you. A young woman in the back raised her hand and said, "How did you learn to stop feeling guilty for walking away?" I thought about it, really thought, when I realized they were never going to feel guilty for pushing me away. I said, that answer landed like quiet thunder. No one clapped, but I saw it in their eyes: recognition, relief, resolve. Jason and I started discussing the idea of moving in together permanently, not because it was expected, but because it felt safe, felt earned. We toured a few spaces, but always came back to mine, not because it was flashy or new, but because it had become something sacred, not just four walls, but proof that I could claim something for myself and keep it, without apology, without fear. One night, he asked me, "Do you think you'll ever talk to them again?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe, if they ever show up as people willing to be accountable instead of parents expecting obedience." He nodded. That's fair. And it was. I still had days where I missed the idea of family, the dinners, the inside jokes, the stories only blood remembers. But I never missed the cost. I never missed shrinking myself to fit their version of me. I had stepped out of that role, and I wasn't stepping back. In late September, I received a formal letter from my parents' attorney. It wasn't a lawsuit, not a new threat, just a quiet legal notice informing me that they were officially vacating Illinois and establishing permanent residence in Clearwater, Florida. Attached was a list of forwarded addresses and instructions to redirect any remaining legal correspondence. No apology, no attempt at resolution, just bureaucracy. I showed it to Monica, who raised an eyebrow and said, "That's about as close to surrender as you'll get from people like them." I nodded. They're not admitting defeat. They're just escaping consequence. She smiled slightly. Same thing in the end. Jason read the letter too. He sat beside me in silence, then asked, "How do you feel?" I didn't know how to answer at first. It didn't feel victorious. It didn't feel sad. It felt real, like something that had haunted me finally picked itself up and walked away without closure. "I feel like it's over," I finally said, and that was enough. A week later, I got a call from Aunt Sylvia, my mother's older sister, who had always kept a cautious distance from the family storm. She asked if we could meet. We sat across from each other at a cafe near Lincoln Park, and she got right to the point. Your mom called me, she said you destroyed the family, said you stole her home. I sighed, preparing myself, but Sylvia surprised me. But you know what? That wasn't the first time she said something like that. She's been blaming other people for her misery since we were kids. I blinked, unsure what to say. I'm not here to guilt you, she continued. I'm here to tell you that what you did, that was brave. I stared at her, stunned. She's your sister. Sylvia smiled sadly, and I've spent my whole life walking on eggshells around her. I watched her hurt people, control people. You were the only one who said no out loud. My throat tightened. Then why didn't anyone stop her sooner? Sylvia stirred her tea. Because we were taught to protect the illusion, and you broke it. That conversation stayed with me for days. Not because it healed anything, but because it confirmed that what I had done wasn't just for me. It shook something wider than I realized. That month, one of my designs was featured in a national magazine for emerging female-led firms. The article included a quote from me about how personal transformation impacts creative leadership. I didn't mention my family by name, but I spoke about boundaries, survival, and the power of walking away. The editor later told me it was the most highlighted quote in the digital edition. That made me smile, not out of pride, but out of recognition. People were listening, and not just to the polished parts, at a networking event. Another designer came up to me early 30s, bright eyes, but nervous. She said, "Your article, it gave me permission to finally move out of my parents' house. I've been paying rent and doing laundry for my siblings for years while they criticized every life choice I made." I nodded slowly. "You're allowed to be more than useful," I said. She blinked. No one's ever said that to me before. And maybe that was the whole point. We don't just survive toxic dynamics for ourselves. We survive them so someone else can recognize they're not alone, that there's another path, that setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel, it makes you free. Around that time, I started painting again, not for profit, not for display, just for me. I pulled out an old easel from college and placed it by the big window in my living room. In the evenings, I'd pour a glass of wine, put on Nina Simone, and lose myself in color. Sometimes it was abstract, sometimes it was memory, but each brushstroke felt like a conversation with my younger self, telling her, "You made it. You're safe now." I still got the occasional message from people connected to my parents, distant cousins, old neighbors, some curious, some passive-aggressive, some just nosy. I never responded, because this wasn't a story I owed to anyone who wasn't part of the hurt or part of the healing. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. The story was already written in court documents, in scar tissue, in real estate records, in stitched skin and quiet Sunday mornings. It didn't need defending. It just needed to be lived. Honestly, one evening, as the first frost touched the window glass, Jason asked, "If you had a daughter someday, what would you tell her about all this?" I thought for a moment, then answered carefully, "I'd tell her that silence isn't love, that obedience isn't respect, and that sometimes protecting your future means letting go of your past." He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around me as the city lights shimmered outside. Winter in Chicago wasn't kind, but that year, it felt cleaner somehow. Like the cold wasn't just stripping leaves from trees, it was finishing the work I'd started inside myself. The holiday season came, and with it, the usual noise of obligation, cards from clients, invitations to parties, nostalgia trying to crawl in through the back door. But I didn't go home. I didn't send gifts to Florida. I didn't even send a message. I chose stillness instead. And then, out of nowhere, something happened that caught me off guard. My firm was nominated for a regional design award, and I was invited to speak at the annual industry gala. Nothing major, just a 5-minute talk about sustainable interiors and how storytelling impacts space. I accepted. When the night came, I wore a deep green dress I'd designed with a local seamstress. Simple, structured, mine. Jason was there in a charcoal suit. So was Olivia, my agent-turned-friend, and a few junior designers from my team. I felt calm, present. But when I stepped off the stage after my speech, I saw 2 people I didn't expect standing by the back exit. Alex and my father. He looked older, paler, not sick, exactly just diminished. As if whatever had once puffed up his ego had finally deflated. He didn't approach right away. He let Alex speak first. We flew in yesterday. Alex said, "I know you didn't want contact, and I respect that, but he asked to come." I looked at Jason, who moved slightly closer, not protectively, just present. My father finally stepped forward, clearing his throat like he'd rehearsed. We read about the nomination. We didn't expect. "Well, you've done well." I nodded. "Yes, I have." He looked down at the floor, hands clasped. "I won't take your time. I just wanted to say," he stopped, swallowed. "I still don't agree with everything, but I see now we lost something, someone, and it wasn't the house." There was a pause, just long enough for it to settle. "We'll go," he said. "I won't bother you again. I just wanted to say I regret how things happened." He didn't say sorry. He didn't own what needed to be owned. But even that half-step a man who once believed control was love was something, not redemption, but recognition. I didn't say much. Just, "I hope you find peace." And that was it. He nodded once and walked away. Alex lingered. "You okay?" he asked. I exhaled, strangely. "Yes." He smiled faintly. "You looked strong up there tonight. Mom would have hated that dress." I laughed quietly. "Then it's perfect. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Some things don't require ceremony, just mutual understanding." After they left, I sat back down at our table. Jason poured me a glass of wine and said, "That felt like something." I nodded. It did. But not because he came, not because he said something almost like regret. It was because I didn't shrink. I didn't crumble. I didn't ache for his approval anymore. I saw him clearly, as a man with limits, and I finally understood that healing doesn't always come from being apologized to. Sometimes it comes from no longer needing the apology. The award didn't matter as much after that. I was proud. But what stayed with me wasn't the applause or the plaque. It was the silence that followed. The kind that doesn't demand explanation. The kind that holds space for what's next. A week later, I hosted a dinner for my team at the loft. We cooked together, shared stories, and laughed like people who were no longer afraid of being too much. I looked around the table and thought, this is family, not bound by blood, but by intention, no manipulation, no debt, just respect, just choice. As we cleaned up, one of my designers, a 24-year-old woman named Kira, stood beside me drying dishes. "You know," she said, "every time I walk into this space, I feel like I can breathe, like the walls know I'm allowed to take up space here." I didn't reply right away. I just nodded. That was the best compliment I'd ever received, because that had always been the real victory, not just reclaiming property, but reclaiming space physical, emotional, spiritual, and making sure that no one ever had to ask permission to feel safe in it again. The anniversary of the party came quietly, almost like a whisper I could have ignored. But I didn't. I remembered everything: the polished floors, the weight of the wine bottle, the disbelief, the silence afterward. I remembered how the room watched but didn't move, and I remembered walking away bleeding, shaking but somehow clearer than I'd ever been this year. I didn't mark the date with bitterness. I marked it with intention. I took the day off work, left my phone on silent, and drove west past the suburbs, past the memories, into the parts of Illinois where no one knew my name or what happened that night. I ended up at a small cabin near Starved Rock, rented weeks earlier with no specific plan other than stillness. I brought only a backpack, a bottle of wine, and a journal I hadn't written in since college. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. The lake didn't ask questions, and for once, I didn't feel the need to narrate my own healing. I just existed in it, somewhere between the third sip of wine and the last orange streak of sunset. I picked up the pen and wrote one sentence: I don't need to be understood to be free. And it felt true. That night, I built a fire, sat in front of it, wrapped in an old hoodie and silence. And I thought about the people who had tried to define me, parents who saw my independence as rebellion, extended family who called my boundaries disrespect, coworkers who mistook my quiet for weakness. And I thought about how many years I believed them, how long I shaped my life around their inability to see me clearly. That was the real damage, not the yelling, not even the bottle. It was the quiet rewriting of my worth through their lens. But they didn't hold the pen anymore. I did. A week after returning to the city, I stood in front of a room full of graduating design students. I'd been invited to give the commencement talk for a local university's School of Architecture and Interior Design. I almost declined, but something told me this was the right room. I didn't talk about the awards or the projects. I talked about starting over, about what happens when you build something not to impress others, but to reflect your values. I ended with this: whatever space you create physically or emotionally, let it tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. When the applause faded, I saw a girl in the front row crying silently. I didn't know her name. I didn't need to. Back at the office, we finalized blueprints for the last shelter in the housing redesign project. This one was for young women aging out of foster care. I walked the site with the lead contractor, pointing out corners where natural light should fall, spaces where mirrors should never reflect too much, softer surfaces near sleeping areas, details I once thought were extra, until I understood how a room could traumatize someone without saying a word. Now, I designed for safety, not just aesthetic, safety that speaks without asking permission. On a quiet Tuesday, Jason came home with Thai food and something in his eyes. I knew that look. It was the look he gave me when I first told him about the trust, when I cried into his shirt without needing to explain why it felt so unfair to win through legal documents instead of love. There's a property, he said, setting down the takeout, not for the firm, for us. He showed me photos of a renovated duplex near Logan Square, brick facade, skylights, a backyard, a place where we could build, not hide, not recover, just live. I looked at the listing, then at him. Let's go see it, I said. And we did, the day we moved in. I hung the same painting I started in the months after the house sold. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't clean, but it was mine. It hung near the kitchen where the morning light could catch it first. Jason poured coffee. I stood barefoot on the hardwood and thought, this is what rebuilding looks like. Not grand, not perfect, but stable, quiet, honest, sometimes. When people online hear a version of my story, the girl whose parents tried to take her condo, who got hit with a bottle, who sold their house, they want a cleaner ending, a courtroom climax, a public apology, a reunion. But that's not life. Life is rarely a movie. Life is boundaries that no one claps for, healing that doesn't post well, peace that doesn't need to be loud. And that's what I want people to understand if you're watching this. And your family has made you feel like your voice is a threat, like your independence is betrayal, like you owe them your success because they gave you survival. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're just waking up. So here's the question I leave you with. If no one else ever validated your worth again, would you still be able to stand in it? Because one day, you might have to, and I promise you on the other side of silence, there's something better than revenge. There's peace.